Hey gang, I'm back. I was directed to another video by Greg Locke, this time talking about liberals. I wonder if he's going to be complimentary. Let's take a look.
Hey guys, Pastor Greg Locke here. Every day of my life, liberals and progressives send me messages saying, how do you believe all that nonsense in the Bible? Nonsense, you say?
Well, more like claims with no evidence to back them up, and appear to go against what we understand about the world. For example, the creation of the earth before the sun, in fact, the entirety of creation occurring over a 6-day period just a few millennia ago, or fitting a pair of every kind of animal in a boat that would be too big to be seaworthy. I don't see why these claims are any less ridiculous than the claim that lightning is caused by a muscle-bound Scandinavian with a hammer, that we keep reincarnating until we escape the wheel of karma, or that Nickelback will ever put out a decent album.
Let me just randomly run down a few things that you believe that are super nonsensical. First and foremost is the belief that socialism is great. No, socialism always leads to communism. It's the death to true capitalism.
First off, since your criticism says that it leads to communism, not that it is communism, I'm assuming you're talking about the modern colloquial meaning of the socialist idea of the government subsidizing and providing services and support to the people, of which I'm in favor of, not the complete abolition of private property, of which I'm not. Yeah, I do support some things being provided by the government. I'm glad that everyone here has access to basic education, roads, police and fire departments, and health care. I really hope I never have to rely on the social safety net out there, but I'm glad there is one, both for the people who do need it, and if anything ever happens to me or my loved ones. Yes, some people can abuse the policies put out there to help, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't have any kind of support system out there. And to your point about communism, communism was predicted to come about when the disparity between the rich and the poor became so great that the masses felt they had no other recourse than to remove the existing political and economic structures altogether.
Remove the existing political and economic structures.
This is something that was exemplified in the October Revolution of 1917. And yes, I realize that's a very simplified version of an extremely complicated situation. Social programs aimed at supporting those at the lower end of society will actually reduce that disparity and feeling of desperation, preventing what could lead desperate people to a communist revolt. Thankfully, no one is trying to increase the divide between rich and poor these days.
And somebody really does have to pay for all that free stuff.
Yes, we know that. That's one of the things taxes are for, to help pay for social programs. As I've said before, I don't like paying taxes, but at least I know they're supposed to go to help those in need and society in general. A single government policy covering essential things like education, healthcare, and infrastructure can be economically better than individuals having to purchase them all separately.
There's a reason guys like Bernie Sanders have initials like BS.
You do realize that not every socialist has the same initials, right? And I'm not sure what you're getting at there. People's initials don't really mean much compared to their actions. I hearken back to a man with the initials JC, who was supposed to be a savior to conservatives. Hey, they're smart, they'll get it.
Number 2, climate change is an actual threat to our civilization. I'm sorry the public school system has failed you and you have believed the lies of billionaire Al Gore. The world is going to do just fine with or without us.
I'm not sure what argument you're making. Are you saying that global climate change isn't happening? Or that it is, but we shouldn't worry about it? You really need to word your arguments better. Touché. If it's the first, that global climate change isn't happening, well, that's demonstratively not true. We can trace average temperatures through more than the past 100 years, watching an increase in temperatures since the Industrial Revolution. If you mean that it won't affect us, the changing climate is causing many, many issues in our society. Sea levels are rising, droughts are becoming more common, and more intense tropical storms are occurring. You are right about one thing. The world will go on with or without us. I just happen to like humanity and would like us to go on as long as possible. If we alter the environment enough that we can't survive, the planet will still go on. It's just that we won't be here.
I'm unbelievably shocked that people actually believe number 3, especially people like Bill Nye the Science Guy. They say overpopulation is a real problem. Do you even hear yourself when you talk? Overpopulation is a real problem. Did you know the math doesn't lie? You can take every person right now on planet Earth, give them 2 square feet of living space, and put all of us side by side in Jacksonville, Florida. Yeah, in one city. Overpopulation, my hind leg.
Wait, out of all the cities out there, why use Jacksonville as your example?
I've always wanted to spend time in a city so nice they named it Jacksonville.
Stop screwing around and pay attention.
Okay, I'll buy that. Anyway, are you claiming that people should spend their entire lives in a 2-foot square? Even prisoners get a 6 by 8 foot cell. I did a quick number crunch. In an area similar to the land area of Jacksonville, you could fit a little over 5 billion 2-foot squares. And with our current population, you're only off by about 2 billion people. Plus, you'd have to live in, you know, Jacksonville.
Traveling to exotic places, Baghdad, Mogadishu, Jacksonville, meeting new and exciting people.
Killing them. Yeah, I've seen your Instagram.
But to get serious, the issue with overpopulation is not simply the space for humanity, but the resources needed to sustain it. Unless you're expecting manna from heaven, food has to come from somewhere. The best estimation is that we have 1.4 billion hectares of arable land, which can produce about 2 billion tons of grain annually. And that's if climate change doesn't drastically reduce our arable land or crop yields. That roughly translates to a capacity to farm enough food for about 10 billion people or so. Since we're at more than 7 billion people right now, we're getting there quickly. And as a side note, that's all vegetation, mainly grains. Livestock is an extremely inefficient use of land, since it takes more vegetation to feed an animal than the nutrients we get out of it. This'll sound selfish, but I happen to like meat, and I don't want to give that up.
And then coming in at number 4 is the belief that is super naive from the politically correct crowd saying guns are bad. Guns are evil.
Look, I don't want to get rid of all firearms. They're a useful tool. Growing up, it was my wife's job to pick off the coyotes before they could get to the cows. And I have several friends who are avid rifle hunters. Not me personally, my weapon of choice is the bow. But honestly, some regulation can be a good thing. Up here in the frozen north, we have a comparable amount of homes with firearms, but we have regulations on what kind of firearms are available, where they're acceptable, how they're to be handled, and most importantly, who has access to them.
No, you don't get to blame spoons because you overeat, nor do you get to blame guns because there's violence.
No, you don't blame spoons for overeating, but the ease and accessibility of high-fat and high-sugar products has corresponded with an obesity crisis. Believe me, I was a member of that group. In the same way, in a country like America, where firearms are relatively easy to obtain, there seems to be an epidemic of firearm-related violence. No, the rest of the civilized world isn't completely safe, and correlation does not always equal causation. But there is a recorded relationship between the volume of gun ownership and firearm homicide rates. In other words, the country with the easiest access to firearms seems to be the one with the most number of shootings, so I think it's safe to assume they're both related. Here's a list of the mass shootings in America where at least 4 people were wounded and killed in the past 5 years. I don't really have a joke here, it's just kind of scary really. Let's just skip on to his next point.
The only thing that's going to stop a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. Say it with me, guns aren't bad. They do save lives.
I've heard this several times and have been shown anecdotal evidence that it's occurred, but how often is it the case? In most mass shootings, the incidents are either stopped by police officers or other agents who are registered by and responsible to the government with the firearms they're armed with, or the gunmen will kill themselves. And even if you're right that only an armed good guy can stop an armed bad guy, maybe, and this might be ignorant of me, you could try to prevent the bad guy from getting his hands on a firearm in the first place, so he can't harm as many people before a good guy is needed to stop him.
And let's certainly be sure not to forget the 5th sacred cow that super liberal people believe. You can identify with whatever gender you want.
Why not? I've gone over in the past the difference in brain structure between cis and transgendered people to cause them to identify with the gender their body was not born with. But Why do you even care? Let people live their lives as long as they aren't harming anybody. Oh, and you feeling uncomfortable isn't a harm that trumps letting other people live how they want to.
So the next time you laugh and scoff at me for believing that God created the world 6,000 years ago, there was a worldwide flood, Jesus died for the sins of humanity, and the Bible is the Word of God.
Yes, and how much of that has any kind of evidence behind it? You can claim and believe whatever you want, but without any evidence to back it up, we have no reason to believe you. Bring evidence to prove your claims, and you might just get a few converts.
Just remember, you believe some very foolish, ridiculous nonsense. So I'll take my chances with God, not with you.
Really, I try to have evidence and reasons for the things I accept. What do you have to back up your claims that any God, let alone yours, exists? But then again, in your eyes, I'm the fool for believing we should make the most of our time here and not try to mess things up for the rest of humanity. Really? Still listing them all?